Good Monday morning of the 21st week of the year. It's also the Feast of St. Augustine, one of the great architects of Christian theology. He is one of the key players of he's the Latin fathers of the church in the 4th century. He died in the 5th century. They're architects of theology. There isn't a theologian that emerged, especially in the Middle Ages, that wasn't reading Augustine. He's one of the great intellectual leaders, too, that is ascribed to by both Protestants and Christians, Catholics, that is. Yeah, that's the truth. But I'd like to just, if I could, just for a second, reflect on the gospel today, because anyway, I share the bite that it has, okay? And I'll share it with you, okay? Those of you who are older that are my age, you're going to have to have grown up in the 40s and the 50s to appreciate maybe some of the bite that's in what I have to say, okay? Right, it's just a thought, maybe not, maybe you see it differently. I know a number of the young clergy today see the 50s as really as an ideal time in the life of the church and would like to see it once again. I think they see the orderliness, the clarity, and the religious commitments, as it were. I don't see it that way. I lived that. And I see it quite differently than that, even though my faith was nurtured at that time, and it's where I got my vocation. But I had to outgrow it and outlive it, and it was through the order that I did. I'll share it with you, okay? So Jesus said to the crowds and to the disciples, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You lock the kingdom of heaven before men. You do not enter yourselves, nor do you allow entrance to anyone, to those trying to enter. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You traverse the sea and land to make a single convert, and when that happens, you make him a child of Gehenna twice as much as yourselves." Boy, he's rough on the Pharisees. They were really the heroes of that period, the heroes of the faith at that time, because they really upheld the law. That's the truth. Our Lord's playing rough in the sandbox here. But this is, in a sense, where I have no gripe. Whatever. You can see why he ticked them off. He was going after the good guys. But the good guys, I think, while they were rigorous reformers of the law, they forgot what the law was for. Christ is not rejecting the Mosaic law, but he wants it also to contain, and especially its spirit, and that they may have missed. And this is what he seems to be going at. See, woe to you, blind guides, who say, if one swears by the temple, it means nothing. But if one swears by the gold of the temple, one is obligated. See, that's Pharisaism, that's rigorism. See, it isn't the spirit of it. It's the spirit of the swearing an oath. But the mechanics and what's involved in it, they lost sight of the purpose, you see. Blind fools, which is better, the gold or the temple that made the gold sacred, see? And you say if one swears by the altar means nothing, but if one swears by the gift on the altar, one is obligated. You blind guides, which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? One who swears by the altar swears by it and all that is upon it. One who swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. One who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who is seated on it. Okay? That means that you are worshiping the fullness of the Spirit, not just the legalities of the rules. Now, where I react to that, okay, whatever it's worth, I don't know if I should even say this, but I think in many ways, at least in the culture, the Catholic culture I grew up with on the East Coast, which was very rigoristic, this could have been easily translated into action, not the condemnation, to practice, because it was true that it seemed like everything was dependent upon the rigors of the laws, not the spirit of the rules and the laws. And it was a time of really severe legalism. I don't know the right word for Pharisaism, to be honest about it. There is a rule, I'll tell you the truth. If somebody says to me, Father Ted, would you say Mass for me tomorrow? I say, sure. Here's $10. Now, I'm not going to say it out of moral concern and moral desire, but out of out of law. I have to say it now because I'm bound by the gift, namely the $10. That's that's canon law. That's just not me. That's canon law. See, if that's not the spirit, if that's not what Christ is condemning here, what's he condemning? You see. Yeah, I don't know how it all evolved that way, but it did. And as far as I know, it still is. Do I think that it's wrong? It's not wrong in and of itself, what I'm describing. It's the rigorism with which it's applied. I don't see that as the spirit of the church today, but I do know it's still within the canonical rules. It's just so easy to fall into law rather than the spirit of the law. The spirit of the law is an adventure, and it isn't clear. Law is clear if you apply it with rigor. But then the gospel is not a gospel of law. It's a gospel of the freedom of the spirit, love. And love is always just a little dangerous, see? Because law won't reduce it. Love will not reduce itself to rules. I think one of the most tragic things I ever heard a husband say to his wife, you have to love me, I'm your husband. No, you don't. You don't have to love anybody. See, love is freely given. There's no rule on earth that says you must love. You must be faithful by law, by canonical and civil law. See? But the love, that has to be free. See? It's sad when you have to reduce the intimacy of the heart to a rule. And the gospel, to me, is not a series of rules, but an adventure in love and in the spirit of love for Christ and the church. You know where I learned that? I learned that in the monastery. I learned that when I was in student life. Nobody was more pharisaical than me. Nobody. I was a fierce rigorist. I mean it. First and foremost to myself, but everyone around me as well. I saw people going to hell like it was going out of style. There was one saint who had a mystical vision that the people were going into hell and only a few were being saved. I forgot the analogy. It was like snowflakes, and the flakes that went going into the neck of a bottle, those were the saved. All the rest were damned. That's the truth. I remember a teacher teaching us that in the kindergarten, in Sunday school. What a religion of terror, of fear and terror. Break a rule, you burn forever. You eat a little meat over 2 ounces, you burn forever now if you die. You're in mortal sin. Where was the love of Christ in all of that? Where? Or the freedom of the children of God? Where? It was a religion of terror and fear. The Second Vatican Council, under the aegis of John the 23rd, called a council to preach a Catholicism of love, a Christianity of love, not fear, not laws, but the freedom that comes with love and its adventure. If you fear anything, you fear you haven't loved well enough, not that you broke a rule or you broke a commandment, that you didn't love God enough, didn't you love your neighbors well enough, you love your spouse, your children, your friends, your colleagues, you haven't loved well enough. The thing that haunts me, if any, have I loved the people that God gave me in my life? Have I loved them well enough? That is, have I loved them well? Or did I shortchange them? See, it's not breaking rules. It's living up to the fidelity of the heart. Have I loved well? That's Christ's message. And where there are laws, you obey the laws, not out of fear, but out of the desire to support the church and do well, and to fulfill your life obligations as a human being, as a Christian, not out of fear, but out of desire to excel in the love of God, to excel in the love of one's neighbor and friends and family, to be unending in your pursuit of loving well. I think Christ is going to ask, did you love, when we die, did you love my kid, the people I gave you well? How well did you love them? How well did you love me in those I gave you? And I hope to be able to answer, I did the best I could. I loved as well as I could, knowing that I'm a fallible human being. I think he's going to say, you did okay. Come on in. I mean that. He calls us to love, not fear. calls us to love.